there, and the sandwiches scene was not in there either. So those scenes are now living inside the film. So yeah, there are quite a few little things that need to be done. There's a scene where they're eating the sandwiches after the bird is lost. So that's coming back in, but otherwise it's just a lot of tweaking. Yeah, questions? Yeah.
It was just a pretty sad story though, but like just the way how, just with the raw footage though, like really opens up though too as well. It's, yeah, like I'm just speechless right now, just with the whole story and all that.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And it was obviously, like physically, it was the most demanding thing I'd ever shot because I'm on the bed with them almost like 10 hours a day because that room is just a mattress. So if you've ever tried to do anything like exercise on a mattress or like move around standing up, it's really like taxing. Yeah. But yeah, it was very tight quarters, and it was like those were just 3 days straight essentially. And the electricity was all pirated from a house next door, so there's not really any kind of consistent power coming into the place. And obviously, it's not plumbed. It's plumbed, but there has no running water.
You said that before they lived in boxes in a shanty built,
Yeah.
something, but then they managed to find a home that, like, it seemed like almost like a home, but not a home, but like a home. And it was just like they lived like, and you would picture homeless people living in boxes. So it's kind of different to see them living through a house that almost functioned
Right.
for them and cleaning themselves. So you gave them that like real humanistic, because when you think of homeless people, you think of dirty homeless people, like that's what you think right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was just kind of, it really is eye-opening to see them more humanistic. Like, I don't know if that sounds strange or whatever, but
Yeah, I mean, everybody creates a domestic space, which was like one of the main reasons I wanted to make this film, right? Even the people that we maybe think don't have domestic spaces or a domestic impulse or a domestic sensibility, they certainly do, and you can see it here. And yeah, so this is an abandoned building. Like this building has since been demolished. The city, tore it down, but at the time it was just empty and with no hope for any kind of renewal. So that's where they were squatting. And there were more people living upstairs, and I have footage of that. I have footage of people living upstairs, but generally the upstairs was less desirable because it was so hot. I mean, it was like that weekend it was 98 degrees, 98 to 100 Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is Celsius. I could never do the translation
30
backwards.
or something.
Like 30
They're in the 30s
to
over.
35. Yeah, it was about, I think it was at 35 Celsius. So the upstairs was a less desirable place to be. So those who came through upstairs were just much more sort of transient, only coming in there for an hour or two and then getting out. They were all connected to Pam and Steve, but the core were those four: Pam, Steve, Ida, and John Fabian.
so seeing the way they were, the young lady did the prostituting, right?
Yeah.
For money, to get money for the four of them,
Right.
right? And that was her boyfriend, the other guy?
Yeah, no, so Pam, the young woman who was doing the sex work, she is providing the bulk of the money to the house. Pam is second behind that, but Pam is the one who's really controlling how the money gets spent and when the drugs get ordered and what chores get done and when they get done. And she obviously sets the emotional tone for the group. All of which are the reasons why in the extended 9-minute continuous shot of Pam trying to inject herself, I have many different versions of that, but when I realized that Pam was really the one in charge of like the emotional space within the domestic sphere, I body mic'd her. So the audio was on her the whole time. So no matter who is being filmed, you can't not hear Pam because she is the central figure in that house. So there are different ways that I tried to accomplish that, and the body micing her was one of them.
Well, the bird scene really showed that because
Yeah.
she lost her bird and everybody was like panicking for her, like they were scared of her or something, and she
Oh, yeah.
didn't help her find the bird, and it was
Yeah.
really different.
Yeah,
You take ownership for leaving the door open, which wasn't really a door, it was just this plywood, right?
Right. Yeah.
But to them it was a door.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought the
Disregard.
toilet scene was
Yeah.
just actually kind of incredible too, because it is one of those things where you don't really realize that like
people that are at their lowest will take care of themselves, and like it's one of those things that I guess is generally overlooked. So just the way he like was like caring for the bathroom
Mhm.
was actually just kind of a different perspective of it. But
I actually love the whole kind of juxtaposition between this kind of heinous thing that a lot of people can't really relate to, of all of them sitting in this room, you know, doing the drugs and this type of thing. It's super uncomfortable, super unnerving. And then almost like after that kind of smash cut to just almost everyday life was kind of brilliant, right? Like they go for lunch. It's not same as us, but you know, they go for lunch.
Yeah.
They
it is.
they you know, lose a pet and they're all upset about it. They, you know, cleaning themselves. Pam's brushing her hair at one point, right?
Mhm.
Just like it was crazy.
Yeah.
Just that one half versus the other is like is super interesting.
The opening scene's really powerful with like how many tries it takes to find a vein for Pam, and that really like speaks to the need for supervised consumption or injection services, because like as I guess they're transferring it between the syringes, because when you inject multiple times, the tip of the syringe is actually bending, so it becomes harder to inject,
Yeah.
and it's causing more and more damage in the veins. So like after I don't even know how many injections there was before she was actually successful. So you think that's multiple times a day that's happening throughout the week. So
Mhm.
that's like many injections, like maybe like 1,000 needle sticks a year, 2,000.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, if you're missing many times, you're doing a lot of damage. So if you have a service where you can go to and somebody is able to find your veins for you properly without you having to do all that, like you're avoiding a lot of blood spatter,
Mhm.
spread of infections and just blood.
Absolutely. It's true.
Did you start the video the way you did purposely, like in terms of like, because it would have been more harrowing, I think, if you would have ended it with the drug injection part. But then when you started it with that, it almost gave, not a glorified homelessness, but it almost gave it like a normal, like a human, like a real human, like you feel okay. Like if I would have walked in that scene first with them injecting and everything like that, I would have been like, get me out of here, right? But
Yeah.
then you watch that, and then you see how they went for lunch, like you said, it was something like normal kind of like life, even though they're homeless. And then you almost felt like you wanted to be nice to them. You know what I mean? Like say you were to meet them and walk by them, you almost feel like you know them.
Mhm.
But whereas if you would have did it the other way, you would have walked away kind of thinking like, good for nothing for him just getting high on drugs and you know that kind of thing. I just felt I
That's
really liked.
passing judgment,
Yeah, I
right?
really like the way you did it. I just really appreciate it because I mean I watch, like she said, YouTube all the time for research and look at different kinds of human behaviors and whatever. And I just really like the way you did it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a deliberate pacing, right? So it builds up. It's like a curve. But really, it's just that is to be honest, that's the centerpiece of the day. So every 6 or so hours, that's the primary concern that they all have because they're physically dependent on opioids, on in this case heroin. Any opioid would do the job, but they're physically dependent, and so the money making, the sort of planning, the thinking about the weather, you know, when they're going to do their chores, it's all kind of, you know, it's a job, and it can be a very physically taxing job, as evidenced by the situation with Pam, which was not very unusual. It's difficult for her to find a vein. It's difficult for many injectors to find a vein if they've been injecting for 3 or 4 or more years, and so that becomes like the struggle of the day is to find a viable vein to get well, right? Because for them, I mean, you see them relaxing. A lot of what you see, like, you know, what seems to be like a nod or a drug stupor or something is just, it's physical exhaustion. They don't, you know, they're not sleeping but 3, maybe 4 hours a night tops. You know, the living conditions are obviously not ideal. It's very hot. So there is that moment, that respite, you know, that just kind of like relief. But it doesn't last very long, and then they're back to getting things done that they have to get done. They have to get food, and they have to find the bird, and have to clean the toilet, shower. Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, when they can't find a vein anymore, do they not like switch to something else, like pills, snorting?
No, you don't usually go back. I mean, if you've if you've had an injection career of any length at all, you'll generally just start to muscle the shot or just go ahead and miss the shots. It's very rare to just never be able to find a viable vein. It's just going to take a really long time. And the average number of times that if you've been injecting for 5 or more years, it'll take you 6 punctures on average to find a viable vein every time you inject a bag. And you're generally shooting
When you
4 or
said-
5 bags.
When you said muscle the shot, what does that mean? Like,
Just don't even bother trying to find a vein. Just go into the muscle, sort of like a vaccination shot, like an
okay,
immunization.
Does it still work?
Yeah, it's a little slower. The rush isn't quite as strong, but it's. I mean, you get as much in your system. It just tends to be like the rush isn't as extreme. So, but the intoxication period is just as, or the therapeutic period of the drug is just as long. It just takes longer to absorb in the body because it's muscle tissue. Yeah.
So, this was the film that was for, advocating needle exchange sites, right? Or am I wrong?
No, it's not really advocating for needle exchange. It's really just telling the story of their lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, who was the target audience on this? Or who were you target to see it?
I mean, I don't know that I have a target audience in mind beyond people that I happen to know. I don't really think about for this particular film, I didn't make it for like National Geographic Channel or something like that, which is what I've done in the past. This was just my own project, and it was really more of a meditation on the domestic life of heroin injectors. And that's not a meditation, but it's sort of an examination. Like this is what goes on behind the scenes. And it's really an attempt to kind of show that there's a lot more normalcy in their lives than not. More things that we can relate to than not. Like we can all relate to grooming ourselves and cleaning and division of labor and losing a pet and being upset with a lover, all of those things.
Kind of funny how people don't equate those normal activities and emotions because they're homeless.
Right,
Just because you're homeless, you don't have the same as all the rest of us. Of course you do.
right,
It's the judgment and the perception of the outside
yeah,
that takes away, right?
right. Well, it's just systematic dehumanization.
Yeah.
It's basically the campaign that we've waged against people who use
Society wants
drugs.
them invisible.
Yeah,
Even more so when they're like affected by drugs and in that stupor, losing a pet, like her little bird, you would be like, oh shit, we lost that bird, you know, but her, it was kind of
Oh,
like
I'd be
a
freaking
human
out, my
life.
bird.
yeah.
It's like, my
Yeah.
bird, oh my god, like, it was just,
Well, and the cat, I mean, they have, interestingly, a cat and a bird, which are not natural allies.
Tweety and Sylvester.
At one time, they had a snake and a ferret, as well as a cat and a bird. And I was like, this is really interesting. This is like,
But you know what that says to me
The
about all
Colosseum.
those creatures is they had the need to love something,
oh yeah,
to care for something, to have a sense of purpose. Those
Yeah.
creatures gave them a sense of purpose.
yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, the film is in many ways, I think, about purpose and just kind of like the daily rituals from which we all derive meaning in one way or another. Most of us in this room don't spend a lot of, or not, they don't spend a lot of time, but we don't inject heroin. You know, that's the one thing that's different. But for the most part, you know, their daily routine is very meaningful to them, as ours are to us.
I thought it was very interesting. A lot of like the writing on the walls, you know, like the part about not stealing because that makes you a bad person.
Yeah.
And there's a couple other ones about like I think finding God within.
Finding
and,
God.
And then actually towards the very end, the one that I thought was like pretty powerful, kind of relating to the film, was Welcome to the Lost World.
Yeah,
It's like it's a world a lot of people don't see ever and
Right.
don't really care to see, but it's like with everything in the film, it's very eye-opening, very humanizing, and it really, I guess, normalizes, because like you see the stress that Pam's going through when she can't find a vein, because like she's like on the border of losing it, because
Yeah.
like she's obviously in a lot of pain, and like then like just the calm.
right.
I love
How
that.
did the crew react? Yeah.
I love that stealing thing because, like, again, it's just it serves the purpose of the film that it's like, you know, humanizing these people, like showing how the same their lives are to ours, and a lot of their their morals and stuff like this are exactly the same as everyday people. They're just down this one path, right? And that's really the only thing that's different. And I just found it so cool, because I think a lot of people would be like, well, you know, you're homeless, obviously you're gonna steal shit, right? But I mean,
They build the
obviously
rules.
not. They have these codes that they still live by.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and they certainly
even
try to
hearing her
enforce it.
kind of distaste with like someone messed up my deodorant or something, right? Like it's like, oh, people are like, we'll do anything around here, right? If you're not looking, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's like such a cool like
Same anywhere else though, right?
yeah.
Like, I mean, you leave your lunch in the fridge at work and somebody
Yeah.
might
Yeah,
understand.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we all have these
It just-
codes. Yeah, that's a
it's
really
like,
important
it's,
point.
like it could be you, like it's anybody, it's everybody, and it's in the end, it's not really like it's their vices. Like we all have our own vices.
Hmm.
Like it doesn't dehumanize any. Like it's a bit ridiculous.
I want to just draw this this conversation into a little bit more about the whole approach to making a film, and obviously just your introduction that you gave, you know, explaining about how it came about, and obviously you spent a great deal of time. You built a relationship with these people, and you found the and I don't know, even when you were shooting, you know, you might not have, you would know that things are important, or because you trained your camera on those things to catch those moments and those scenes. And I just know from my experience over years of making films that that's a training, that's a way of, it's like an artist who's a painter. They know how to see things so that they can translate them, and that's what a filmmaker does in this case, and that's what a documentary filmmaker does. But on top of that, it's a whole layer of human relationship, and like I find every single subject in every film that I make a relationship with the people whose story I am telling, because in this case, Greg is the storyteller, but when you're watching it, he is invisible, but he has made yet every single choice, every single decision of what to show, when to show it, how to show it. And those are the things that you all need to think about when you're creating something. And probably the biggest lesson for me in this is, like, no journalist or whatever could go in and would make this film, would have the eye and the understanding and the sensitivity that all of us, we have no clue about what life is like for, you know, heroin users in Chicago. But all of a sudden now we've had like a whole education, and we picked up all these things, and we can like relate to these people and like them.
Hmm.
And that is the magic of film. So, but it's a huge ethical responsibility, because a lot of people, especially if they watch documentaries, they think it's some kind of like objective, that it's true, that it's, you know, this is that the person behind the camera and everything is presenting it all objectively and everything. Nothing could be further from the truth. So I just want to get into this whole discussion of kind of like the ethics and involved in any kind of thing where you're you know, telling other people's story, you're fabricating it, and you're searching for truth. But you know, if you really cut any film down, it's all filled with untruths. Because if you told the complexity of the truth or whatever, it would just be whatever. You wouldn't be able to draw meaning from it.
Right, and even just the manipulation of time.
Right.
I mean, that alone creates a huge fiction. Like,
Right.
this all seems to have happened in one day, but it did not. I mean, it happened over the course of many, many weeks. You know, most of these things happened to have occurred within a 3 to 3 day period that I lived there with them and tried to do the bulk of the photography. But even that, and then the fact that I was funded by a British production company to shoot a completely different film. This was almost entirely interviews. Like I've got like 40 hours of interview footage, like still shot on sticks, framed interview, and I just chose to ignore all of that stuff because it's just deadly boring. I was like, I don't want to make an interview film, but I took their money thinking that I was going to eventually do that, and they lost interest in the project. So I was like, I don't know, I guess I get to keep the money. And I did. But like there were, you know, things are rearranged, and that's one of the great things about film. And like the song at the end is augmented. It's actually playing on a tape player in the other room, but you can barely hear it. So the Blind Willie Johnson song, I add that in. So it's, you know, playing endogenously, but you wouldn't be able to hear it very well as a viewer. So I bring that in. That creates another layer of fiction, right? Because it's an emotional punctuation to that end.
Did you get permission to have those songs in the film? You know how you have to.
That song is public domain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's also in the space shuttle, the one that's been circling the Earth, the Challenger.
Okay.
Forever. Yeah, it's one of the 300 songs put onto a record in case aliens.
Find us.
Yeah. Anyway, just a little known fact about that song. But like, you know, so there's the rearrangement of things and sequencing of things. They don't all happen in the way that you see them. So there are fictions abound, or fictions do abound in every documentary. And then, you know, they're just where I'm pointing the camera, the fact that you didn't even know there were people on the second floor. There are all sorts of things that I know that you don't know that are on film, but you don't see them, right? So just what's left on the editing room floor is monumental. But there are other things, ethical choices, that inform how you frame shots and whether you zoom or don't zoom, and whether you stand above people. Like there's only one time in all of the filming where I actually stood up because I couldn't kneel on the bed anymore. You know, that pain you get when you're kneeling. So I had to stand up, but I was, you know, very, very deliberately shooting on level or shooting low angle shots, not shooting above, which is the typical like Vice channel, look at the junkies and their squalor kind of thing, where there's an angle looking down on them. It's a subtle thing, but it's a camera work decision that derives from an ethical framework that I try to adhere to.
You really caught that when she was having problems shooting up their, Elaine, what was her name? The main character?
Pam?
Pam. She, when you put the camera toward the lady that she was going to be shooting up next,
Yeah.
she had this look on her face that was like, just kind of really sincere, like, oh, like just pure pain or something for her friend that she
Yeah.
couldn't get her needle in. And that's how you captured that, was probably kneeling on the, because if you were said, like, if you're up high above looking at them,
Right.
as you said, in the squalor, it would totally not, you wouldn't have caught that, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and one of the things that makes my camera work sometimes feel strained is that a lot of people that I know will shoot, if it's like the one-person band kind of operation where you're basically doing the sound and you're doing the shooting and all of that stuff, it's difficult to pay attention to everything. But most people that I watch, and a lot of students that I've worked with and people I've collaborated with, only look through the viewfinder, the LCD screen. So they're just constantly looking there. They don't see anything else that's going on around them. And I think it's really important, just as a technique, if you're going to do this kind of work, to actually be paying attention. Mm-hmm. So if I've trained the camera on Kelly, you know, and there's more things going on, right? And I may be interested in trying to capture those things, either in response to what Kelly's doing or Kelly's response to those things. But, you know, I have to look away. And when you do that, it's kind of like when you look over and you're driving and you sort of veer in the other direction or whatever. It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, like, things will get a little, but it's important because then you can see what's going on. You can see that Ida is sitting there waiting to be injected. And so she's eager. She's really eager for Pam to get that in because she has a self-interest, but she's also feeling the pain of her friend going through this struggle. And both of those, in my view, were written all over her face. Like, it was just like both things at the same time. Complete self-interest and complete concern for her friend.
Greg, just what you were saying about, you know, keeping an eye open. I know Kelly and I work together all the time. And even though I do sound and she's shooting, I often tap her on the shoulder to point things out. Mm-hmm. But I'm conscious of the fact that she's got a job to do and I'm a little freer because the mic can go off, subject a little more.
Yeah.
And we have a technique where generally I do a lot of the interviewing, and then I get tired and run out of questions. So then I just turn to Kelly, who's watched everything, and I ask her if she's got any questions, and she asks a few questions. And then I have a chance to take a break and think about, how it worked, and then I can come back with another question. And that system works well to capture, what you need. So I guess the point is it's teamwork.
Yeah.
Just because you have one job, which is to hold a microphone or to shoot, to use the camera, you have to keep an eye out for, everything else that's going on and assist your teammates, because it is a team effort.
Oh, it totally is. And for me, like the models, the Maisels, the Maisel brothers, and David and Albert Maisels, and they did so many amazing films. One did sound, one did the camera work, and that's the ideal kind of collaborator. You two work very well together. I've certainly had like hired sound operators who just we didn't have the rapport and the shorthand, or the mutual knowledge for that kind of tapping on the shoulder to happen. But I think it's the optimal situation. For
Well,
sure.
we often go into things, and we've already talked about
Yeah.
what we want and all of that sort of thing. We have strategies,
Yeah.
kind of like you distract them while I steal the silverware or something. But we know what we want from somebody, and you can't come up to somebody and say, "So tell me how you felt when your mother died."
Right.
You have to somehow get to that,
Right.
right? And we work those things out sort of in advance,
Yeah.
how we're going to structure things to get what we're after, right?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
but the key thing, like these great filmmakers and even like Robert Flaherty and that, and what you mentioned was time factor. And it's all about building a relationship.
It is.
And a lot of times, even if you did 40 interviews, you let people, you were actively listening to have them tell the story and everything. And then later you're going to suggest, I always do like many pre-interviews in documentary films, so you get to know them, it's not like it's going to get stale or old. In fact, you just keep learning, and then you can start planning, well, what would be the best way to tell that story, like show that story, instead of just the visually. And it's such a intense investment, and in the relationship and the building of trust that is the most important thing. And then if you're doing something where you're expressing your story, then it's this whole process of honing it down and having somebody else to sound off of. But anyway, there's all kinds of so many different issues involved, and the only way that you learn, because there's a different ethical question in every single project. So the best way to do it is not to be afraid, just be curious, listen to people, and then don't commit also to that people get false expectations. Because I've only met like one or two people that didn't want to tell their story. All of us have an urge to tell our story and be recognized, something of us, and loved, and all of that kind of stuff. Like so those are the things. So it's really exhausting, but it's so rewarding. And then you always have to remember later, when you've finished it all, you've done all this work, you've made all these millions of decisions, and you make something, then if you're making it to show people and get a message about and engage people, you have to think, what is it going to be like when that person is sitting here watching it with 300 other people or 200 other people? Like, how are they going to, did you depict them in a way that they'll feel good about.
Or at least fairly.
Or,
Fairly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And lots of times, you know, there's, I know filmmakers who, after they did a film about a particular person who was super interesting and all that kind of stuff, and they did the thing and it was a successful film, but it's like, I want to make a film about fish next. Like, I just don't want to do it. Just give me something easy.
Yeah.
So,
Can I just say that one thing I'm curious, is we've been talking for half an hour, nobody's asked you, and Kelly's touching on it, but about your relationship. Nobody wants to know what happened to Steve and Pam.
Yeah.
I know, because I've known Greg for a few years, and I know that you were at their wedding, and I know, you know, all sorts of things that aren't in the film.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of curious that nobody said, well,
Yeah, I wanted to know if they're
where do we
still
go
alive.
from here, right? And I think it's really important, right, because Greg hasn't walked away,
Yeah.
right? It's easy to make a film or whatever and walk away from your subject and, you know, move on to something else. And some, you know, you may grow apart and that sort of thing, but you've devoted a lot of time and emotion in dealing with them. And he's probably on the phone right now.
Yeah. Yeah, he's there. He's all over my Facebook. We're connected. I mean, Steve's doing very, very well in life. He works for the syringe exchange program. Pam passed away 2 years ago from complications around a brain stem infection. It was a really bizarre thing. But anyway, so she's passed. But yeah, it's true. I've known them for a long time. I met Steve when Pam was in prison. She got out of prison, and then he went to prison for about a year. So he asked me to look out for her. That was like 2005 to 6. Then in 2008, they asked me to be the videographer at their wedding. So I was. But Ida and John have also passed away, both of them from overdoses. So Steve, of the 4 who were featured in the film, Steve's the only one who's still alive. But he's doing exceptionally well. He's just recently kind of taken the leadership position for the Chicago Area Network for Drug Users, which is like a lobbying advocacy kind of union organization for people who use drugs. So yeah, I see him every week.
He sounds like Al Pacino.
Yeah, and he really, yeah, he does. He does a lot. And he really wants me to finish this damn film. What is it? I mean, he has seen 5 of the, because this thing's had 7 or 8 cuts, 7 or 8 iterations. And he has seen 5 of them. He's like, just be done already. I can't tell the difference anymore. But he loves it. And I think not because it's a great film, but because he loves his wife.
Yeah, it must be a punch in the gut for him to see it now with them, his friends gone, eh?
Yeah, it is a bit of a punch in the gut. But I mean, he's strong. Yeah.
And you said that the purpose initially was that, you know, he wanted a record.
Yeah.
Like you've given him, maybe that's why he wants to finish it.
Yeah, right.
Finish the record, but you've given him something otherwise
Yeah.
he wouldn't have of Pam.
Yeah, and there's another, yeah, so I did a film called The Family at 1312, which I thought about showing here, and that was one where, and that follows, it's a different house, it's not an abandoned house, it's a rented house, but the woman who runs the house is also a fairly high-powered local gang leader and a crack cocaine distributor, and that was a film where, I mean, there's some serious violence in that film. And when I showed it to her, she was like, I'm not saying I love the way I look in this film, but you got it right. So that was the best I could hope for. The film before that, about the Brickyard Village, it opens with this guy, Jeff, who always called himself a professional crack smoker and a professional thief and a street fighter. So those were his 3 main titles, self-given titles. And so he was a real tough guy, but he had stolen some work tools from a guy in the neighborhood, and that guy paid 2 kids in the neighborhood to come into the Brickyard while Jeff was sleeping and beat him with bicycle frames. So they beat him as he was sleeping, put him in the hospital, punctured lung, concussion, all kinds of terrible things. He got out of the hospital a few days later, and then meanwhile, his wife left him. They were living in the Brickyard together, and she decided to go off with somebody else. And it was a big thing. They'd been together a long time. And so he gets out of the hospital, he's, you know, on medication. Because he never touched opioids, so he was on some painkillers, feeling a little loopy. He was sleep deprived. He gets back into the brickyard. He's walking around trying to like pick up the pieces of his life. And he just stops. He's like, is the camera on? I said, yeah. So he starts talking. He's telling the story of what happened over the past 3 or 4 days. And he didn't expect this to happen, but he started to cry. And then he says, okay, stop the camera. And so I stopped filming. But that scene is what I opened the film with. And I showed it. And we were sitting around, there were like 15 of us in this room, in this living room of this house. And no one had seen the cut yet. And I'm like, I hit play, and I realized then, like, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have started this movie with that scene of Jeff, because he just summarizes like his whole philosophy of the Brickyard. And he starts crying, and he's sitting next to me. One of the things Jeff always said to me was like, when you get in a fight, don't ever announce what you're gonna do. Don't say anything. Don't like make any physical threat. Just hit them. Just hit them.
Element of surprise.
Yeah, and so he's like sitting next to me, and he's like, what the fuck am I doing? What's wrong? Am I crying? What's wrong with me? Am I crying? I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna hit me. And he gets up and he stops the DVD player, and he turns around, and he's looking at all of us, and he looks at me, and he's like, I'm the realest motherfucker there is. Nobody keeps it real like I do. I was like, yes. Which, you know, it might have actually caused him some embarrassment, but the point is that even if he felt a little bit embarrassed by that, he and I had such a relationship, because we lived together. I shared a shanty with him for 18 months. So we had that kind of thing where he could sort of let it go. Not to say that if you're going to do this kind of work, that's what you're going to need to do. It's unusual to have that long term of a commitment to a group of people. But somewhere between like dropping in as a news journalist and spending 18 years is a happy medium. Also, don't do documentary if you don't like people.
Yeah.
Do animation, or I mean, there's so many other forms of expressing nonfiction truth. It doesn't have to be
if you don't have the emotional
don't do it.
Stamina for it. And also, you know, I mentioned earlier on when we were talking about the pitches and all that kind of stuff, and if you don't have a job where you can do it kind of like semi-hobby like for some people, or, you know, as a volunteer, just as a passion for you, and but if you want to try to like make money and do this kind of work, it's pretty well impossible. You could get some money to help pay for people in your crew, but it's not really like a career choice.
Yeah.
But I think it's a vocation. And I think that nowadays, for most, especially young people, you know, like there are no careers. There's only vocations and ways of making some money.
Yeah, it's true.
When I was going to those interviews, I just wanted to ask how you, because some interviews were like an hour and a half, and the interviewee, you could kind of tell the difference between, say, understanding something about what you're trying to look at, like say homelessness. The person that interviewed didn't understand, say like mental health issues. So sometimes that's a factor that people don't get when you see homeless people, is that some homeless people that they don't understand even what they're kind of doing, that they're homeless. You know what I mean? So when I was listening to the interview, it was like kind of a waste of a certain question, because she didn't get the question right and the interviewee didn't understand it. And then also like interviewer would go on, let them ask a question, the person would answer, but they would go on and on. They wouldn't know when to stop the person. So, I mean, we all might have to know this kind of stuff, because I know that was something that me and Shirley struggled with when we did ours a couple of years ago. Like, we just let the person talk on and on. We're just like, okay, that's like a whole waste of...
And off topic.
Yeah, off topic, and I just wanted to get some future, maybe not right now, but just to, so I can tell you now so we don't forget.
Well, but you know, that's all the learning thing, is that first of all you have to learn how to listen, and you have to learn how to engage with people, and sometimes you might feel like it's, you know, if someone else is editing it, they might want to kill you for just letting the person go on. But it's all trust building. It's all learning how to listen. That's the worst, to me, that's the biggest flaw of journalism. They don't have time to listen and then see something else. They want to get in, get the answer, get out of there, and they don't really want to listen. But for documentary, listening, that's how you make relationships. So I never find it a waste of time to let people go on, and you just have to learn to be tactful, because sometimes it can be more, it's so surprising, because every once in a while you don't know, there's a little bubble of there's a little point, there's a little something in there when they're telling their story that you would never be able to foresee. But that is the thing that comes out, and those moments, you only need one or two in an entire film. And all of the rest of it is just a background and all that, and to help you be able to construct something that you think is the significant thing for the story that you are telling. Like, never ever pretend that you are, that it's their story. Because really, in the end, it's your story, and they are entrusting it to you.
So you can also use as I just did to interrupt Kelly,
Yeah.
techniques of active listening.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I have learned to do when people are like, it's going on. This is not a bubble that's forming. It's just like they've gone on a whole other tangent. Like, yeah, but that's really interesting. So that thing that you were saying just a second ago, though, like, you know, it just used the active listening. If you just exaggerate the nod a little bit, and then open your mouth a little bit, they start to stop talking.
Well, because when I'm a student, so last year I took research methodologies to get into, or the year before to my HBA, I had to take this course about research. So we had to learn about how to do interviews and how to get the person, because that's kind of the difference between academia and what yous are teaching me, because that's where I learned that from. It was like, okay, if a person's going on for like an hour, like, do you really have an hour to sit there and listen? So like, I'm kind of taught that on one side, and then what you're saying is like totally different. So I really
Give them two.
I really love being here, because I'm like learning a whole different kind of way of learning these processes.
But really, in the end, the only way to learn is doing it. And that's the whole point of this thing, is that we're gonna, at some point, you know, day one is chatting about all these ideas, like, sort of the thing, and tomorrow we're gonna like get down to the nitty gritty of how do you know, how could you use animation, how can you use a camera, and then all these other little things will kind of come out. But only every project you learn something new.
Myself.
Okay.
Just going back to some of your earlier comments and Kelly's comments in terms of making decisions as a director and editor and whatnot, watching the film, the only scene in uncompressed time was actually the drug shooting scene. Everything else is time compressed. So is there any particular reason why you made those kinds of decisions as a director and editor to have one? Maybe the second real-time scene is bathroom cleaning scene when there's no cuts. But everything else
That's
is
cut. That one's compressed too.
That's one is compressed. So
Yeah. No, I left I mean, that's why it's a 9.5 minute
Right.
continuous shot in
Right.
real time, because it's their flow state. It's what they are doing. They're organizing the rest of their day around that activity. So that's the activity that gets the uncompressed time on the screen.
So if you think of the film as a kind of like a day in the life of these people, this would be the focal point. So it's a kind of
Yeah.
scene that centers everything else. Everything else is kind of connected to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which, you know, acknowledges that that life is multifaceted for everyone. There are other things happening in life, as you see here, but there is generally a principal concern for each of us, and you know, it's just sort of bare bones and acknowledgement that is, when you are heroin dependent, that is the one thing that is going to occupy more of your mental energy for that day until you've satisfied that goal. It's going to occupy more mental energy than anything else, and that's just the physical, psychological reality of dealing with dependence.
So what would have been lost if you were to compress that, just from your point of view as a director? Like,
Well,
if you would say, okay, I'm going to cut this down to like 4 minutes or 5 minutes. as
I don't know
opposed to
where
like-
I would cut it,
Okay.
but the other thing is that it also communicates like I said, the place, Pam's place in the hierarchy of that house. And it really, I think, shows more than anything else just what a dependency can do, and the kind of physical punishment that any commitment, when it's that deeply ingrained in us, will allow us to engage in and sort of withstand, persevere. But we will do whatever our commitment is, we will go to great lengths, even if it's physically punishing to ourselves, to meet the ends. And that's what's going on with her. And I felt like that was an endeavor worth not cutting. I wanted to respect that.
Just one thing to say in relation to that scene. For me personally, watching that scene, I think audio was more troubling or disturbing or uncomfortable than the visuals.
Yeah, that's exactly why
And so
I put a body mic
if
on
that
her.
was just the same visuals with no audio, or if you edited audio in a different way or maybe enhanced it or whatever, or I think it would have completely changed the.
No, that's what I was saying.
Kind of scene.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, I had many different scenes of all of them injecting, but what I realized is that if I put a lavalier body mic,
Right.
so a microphone was attached to her body, that was what I really needed to do, and I was able to do that, and that's the one I wanted to include. Yeah, so the audio is telling a big part of that
Yeah,
story.
I think for me that's where the story is really told, in the audio portion rather than the video.
Yeah,
Not that video is irrelevant, but I think audio is more powerful than.
right. No, if you close your eyes, you're still in the
Yeah,
struggle
yeah,
with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, it's a little distant. What I think is happening is that it's a little distancing when you first start to see it, but a couple or 3 minutes in, I think we all begin to gradually identify with her. And when she finally succeeds, it's like we've all succeeded. She's helped us to get past something that we were very uncomfortable with. That's why. That's the main thing. That's the main device in that film for you to identify with her, is that she achieves victory and we feel good about it.
Before you started the film, or to film, did you have an outline, or did you just, or how much of it did you have prior to filming? In other words, did you have any storyboards, or did you just go in and film and then decide after that, this is the stuff I'm gonna cut out and this stuff I'm gonna keep, or what was the process?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in the whole tabula rasa thing, like we go in as blank slates. I mean, obviously I had known these folks for a long time. I had been to so many of their different dwellings and always had been impressed by just how incredibly domestic they were, on, like I said earlier, on that spectrum. Like everybody kind of has those concerns, but they were just like really really good at it. And so I always wanted to make a film that centered around the community that they created through their domestic space. So I went into it knowing that I was just going to try to, like, there's drug stuff obviously, but it wasn't really my main concern. But I knew that it's a central part of their day, so it would need to be a central part of the film. But for the rest of it, I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I knew them, so this is the world in which I live. This is the world I occupy. Not full time, but enough to know that the stuff they do during the day is the stuff that I do during the day. And so I just want to make sure I get all of that. The cooking and the cleaning and the daily ritual, So I don't have a storyboard. I do storyboard with the experimental stuff and the narrative filmmaking, but not in documentary. So then it was about cutting it and just sort of deciding like what's going to make the film, what are the themes, and then how do I pace it, how do I structure it, how do I build and then bring it back.
That brings me to the next question, which you just talked about. You have like 40, 50 hours of the film, and how difficult was the editing process, and what made you select the scenes that you selected, which is brilliant, by the way,
Oh, thank you.
And how did you come about presenting the story in such a way after, like in 50 hours of editing, movie and just a few minutes, and it was powerful.
Well, once I decided that I wasn't going to use any of the interviews, that was like 28 hours that I could just cut. Like, I'm not going to use any of these interviews. And then after that, it's just, going through like any scene with like really bad audio, I would just like not use that, because there were times when like I did have a soundy working with me, and There were times when, like, for various reasons, the sound just wasn't good. And then I would, like, look at scenes where maybe the video wasn't so great. And just, like, kind of start on a sort of quality control basis, cutting things out. But if the camera was a little shaky, but it was essential content-wise, I would keep it if the audio was good. So then it was just about, okay, well, what things do I want in here? Because there are many other things that, you know, like cleaning the floors. You know, how much cleaning do we really need to show? And which scenes communicate that most effectively? Like cleaning the bathroom, I had several different shots of that over time. So really it was just about kind of like figuring out which ones were paced best and contained the greatest riches in terms of audio-visual material for the viewer.
So that is the most time-consuming job.
Editing?
It is the most time-consuming job.
Well, it's taken me 6 years. What do you mean?
I mean, in the filmmaking, if you look at the time that you spend like 3 days in filming.
Oh,
editing is really the time that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I haven't been editing consistently, constantly for 6 years, but yeah, editing it takes longer, for sure.
That's why we're not doing editing in this workshop. We're gonna plan for it.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So.
I really like that idea of like regardless of what's in the scene or how attached to it in the moment you were, like if the audio's not good, if the video's not good, just kind of like get rid of it, right? Because it's like there's this time where like limitation can really bring out a lot of creativity, right? Like when you look at what you have left, okay, what story is in here or what series of events really work together, kind of. I really like that idea that like don't get attached to, well, it's like what we were saying before, like the story evolves, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, don't get attached to this moment that you had, because who knows what complications might arise, right? And who knows what story you couldn't tell if you were just so attached to that scene per se, right? It's like a kind of kill your darlings thing.
Well, it is a kill your darlings thing. I have one very specific example. It's about the folks who were upstairs. Spider, Pepe, and Jerome. They were all upstairs, and at one point the house goes completely dark and it's on lockdown because the police are out front. And the police are out front hassling some young people who are across the street posted up dealing drugs, cocaine, crack. And so, but the police are out there for like 2 hours, and it's the most beautiful shots up there because it's like the sun is setting and these guys are silhouetted against the uncurtained windows of the house, and there's all this conversation about like the police, but it just didn't fit anywhere, and it was unusual. It's like, I mean, not unusual for them to encounter the police, but for the house to go in total lockdown like that. And it also like brought the viewer upstairs into a completely different space, one that Pam and Steve never go to meet new people who are beautifully shot. It was like the best cinematography I did was upstairs during that scene. And I was just like, this sucks. Like, it just takes you out of everything. And it's not about the Pam and Steve didn't even go up there. Like, had they gone up there, maybe I could have justified it. But I was just putting it in out of my own vanity and ego. Mm-hmm. So then I just realized I'm just being vain and egotistical. Cut it.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm still making edits. I still have edits. I've written them down tonight. I am.
Stuff that you see, yeah. Well, I think we should, it's almost 11, which I'm sort of surprised. I didn't think we were going to go this late. Yeah, so, Sue Lookout, do you guys have a couple of comments or questions?
Report.
Okay, can you, yeah, you know, he's gotta just put his sound on. Okay. Oh. Yeah. Is your camera's on? Yeah, okay.
Does she mute herself?
Yeah. Are you on mute, Lane?
can't hear you. Communicate with her.
Yeah, I know, she,
Can you
I'm
text-
not, it's Riaz's.
Okay. Oh yeah, can you just message her? Little chat box. Oh, there it is.
There, okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
it's good, it's good.
Now we're all good, okay.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay,
Out there.
yeah, we're, okay,
There
yeah,
you go.
okay,
There you go.
we got ya.
Okay, so I'm good now? Okay. No questions right now.
You're kidding.
I typed it in, I messaged it, but
Okay.
it's hilarious.
Oh, okay, I
I
just
feel like we
got it
all
now.
just got punked in a serious way. For all that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Well, okay, so, but since we can talk to you direct, so anyway, so I think we should call it a night. I think this has been a really wonderful session, and I want to thank everybody for coming. And tomorrow we're gonna talk all about animation and ways of using different kinds of animation. And then we're going to carry on these little conversations about ideas and sort of form our groups, right? And
Are we starting at 5:30 or 6:30?
6:30. From now, it's 6:30. That's
Okay.
it. Like, that was a bit kooky, the whole original idea of 5:30. Because then I realized, like, who's going to eat before then? And anyway. So, yeah, 6:30. And, yeah, we'll do animation. And then we'll be talking about our ideas, trying to come up with who wants to work with who. And then what we'll do is, then we're gonna look at cameras. And so, you know, we can share our experiences with cameras, how you might wanna use a, you know, cell phone. If you have cameras, bring your cameras. And then we can look at them and just talk about all different ways of using cameras. And for animation, if you have a tablet or
I'm gonna bring my animator.
if you have an animator, handy animator, if you have a laptop, bring that if you're.
Yeah, if you want to follow along.
If you want to follow along and try things, that sometimes it makes it easier. Sure. Yeah.
And we'll also be doing the session on sound?
Then no. So sound is going to happen on Friday.
Okay.
So Friday it's going to be all about sound, and then there'll be, you know, like planning for the shoot on Saturday, and then the last session's going to be projection mapping. So, and if you're not interested in projection mapping, not everybody might be, but if you're not, then you could continue planning if you're people on there, you know, or if you want help, like we're gonna all be here, so help with, you know, like the practical elements of planning a shoot or an animation, or what
Or a
things you
game
need,
or-
or, yeah, game plan for how you're gonna go about it.
Yeah, I guess to go along with the planning, I'm thinking of like the story or pitch, like there's a lot of thought into like what the story is, but like also keeping in mind like who you would need to make it happen. So like you have your own skill set. What other kind of skill sets do you need to bring in? Because very well some people in the room might have those. If not, where could we find those? When are we planning to get it done by? I mean, some ideas are really big ideas, some are like really small ideas. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. You might have a really great idea, but it may take a lot longer to put forward and do. It doesn't mean it's not something worth working on for the workshop, because you could do a lot of really great legwork for it, and like that could like shoot you right forward to continuing. But yeah, I think like just keeping an eye or thinking about a lot of that will definitely help a lot moving into tomorrow and like the group forming and further planning.
And can I just say that, remember, this is a training session, So, you know, in some ways, the subject is not the important thing, but if you can find the character, right? If you've got a story or a person that you can work with, you know, that has, even if they collect model cars, or it doesn't matter what it is, right? It doesn't have to be a hard-hitting topic, but you need access to someone. They have to be engaging, right? So to say that you want to make a film about something and then have to spend half a day running around town looking for somebody that might have something to say, you've lost half a day. So if you know, if there are, you know, people that you know, if it's documentary, that can tell a story, that have a story to tell, that you know, you can work with, then you can produce something, and you know, you'll go through all the steps, you'll produce a film, you'll be satisfied or not with the outcome, but you'll learn. Because there's just no time, right? You've got a day really to do some shooting, so that you want to hit the ground running. So think of somebody who gets up early in the morning on Saturday.
Or I'll put my pitch in for night clerks at hotels.
Right.
That's
Because
right.
they stay up all night.
Yeah.
You can start with them around 4 a.m.
Right.
getting material
Yeah.
knocked out by 6.
And Greg's got an in at the Prince Arthur, so.
Come on by the Prince Arthur.
Yeah.
We'll hang out. We'll get to know Joseph.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks,